just like the city that stagger on the coastline, and a nation that just can't stand much more. Like the forest buried beneath the highway, never had a chance to grow.
Winter in America. Gil Scott-Heron here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Our guest, Tyson Slocum, Director of Public Citizens Energy Program. He says BP has one of the worst safety records of any oil company operating in America. Joining us from Washington, D.C. Before we go down to Louisiana, Tyson, explain why corporate crime isn't dealt with the same way as common crime, especially when we're talking about the deaths of workers.
Well, I think we have a very weak legal system that inadequately holds corporations accountable, and that, I think, shows the incredible power that large multinational corporations exercise over our democracy every day. Last year, the Supreme Court in the Citizens United case took it to a very radical step, enshrining corporations with the rights of people under the constitutional protections of First Amendment speech rights. But the Department of Labor has a number of statutes requiring all sorts of regulations for employers to try to protect workers, but the fines and sanctions for failure to adhere to those laws and regulations are incredibly weak. And again, when you're dealing with a company like BP that makes billions and billions of dollars in profits every quarter, fining them $20 million here, $50 million there, just simply is a cost of doing business for the company. And so we as a society need to think about, when we're faced with a corporation like BP that over just the past couple of years has shown willful disregard for U.S. laws and regulations. 15 people died at a BP refiner explosion where the company was found to have committed hundreds of violations of workplace safety laws. We have to have permanent sanctions against corporate criminals like this, whether that's making managers and top executives criminally responsible for that misconduct, or sanctioning the company by revoking its corporate charter or other types of permanent harm to the company, because simply issuing a fine is just a slap on the wrist for a giant multinational energy corporation like BP. And if an investigation determines that this tragic oil spill and the deaths of 11 workers from the explosion on April 20th in the Gulf was due to negligence on the part of BP, we cannot tolerate just another fine and another slap on the wrist. We've got to take sanctions against this company. Do
you think the BP CEO, Tony Hayward, should go to prison?
Well, I think that we need to have an investigation to determine if BP was negligent. And if it turns out that BP was negligent and that the CEO was aware of decisions that were made by top management that led to that negligence, then yes, absolutely, executives should go to prison if they are found guilty of negligence that resulted in the deaths of workers.
Well, ever since BP's Deepwater Horizon rig exploded and sank several weeks ago, BP and Transocean have been hit by a spate of lawsuits. We're joined now from New Orleans by an attorney representing several workers who survived the blast. As well, he is representing Natalie Rostow, the wife of one of the 11 workers who were initially missing, now presumed dead. 23-year-old Shane Rostow was a floor hand working on the drill floor when the explosions occurred. Just a day after the explosions, Scott Bickford filed the first lawsuit on behalf of Natalie Rostow against BP, Transocean, and Halliburton, accusing them of negligence and violating numerous statutes and regulations. We did invite BP on the broadcast, but they declined to come on. Scott Bickford, welcome to Democracy Now! Please explain your suit.
Good morning. The suit that we have filed for Natalie Rostow is for the death of her husband, and it's on behalf of her and her 3-year-old son at this point. We've alleged BP and Transocean's negligence, as well as allegations of Halliburton's negligence. We've done further investigations to identify the drilling contractor on the rig at the time, to identify people who manufactured certain various equipment on the time, and we'll go ahead and amend and add those parties as this suit progresses.
Can you tell us about Natalie Rostow and about her husband, who is now, of course, presumed dead?
They are from Liberty, Mississippi. Natalie and her 3-year-old son still live there. Shane had been working as a floor hand on the rigs for about 3 years. He went out there to earn a very good living for his family. Rig workers make anywhere from $70,000 to $100,000 a year doing this work. They had been married just about 3 years. And he was a very dedicated worker. He was the guy that had his wedding date and his son's birth date written inside his hard hat.
And when was the last that Natalie heard from Shane?
Actually, the morning of the incident.
What did she hear?
They had just talked. It wasn't anything about the rig or as you know, this happened around 9:30 at night. He was on the drill floor when it happened, along with 10 other individuals. Those are the individuals, all of the individuals that haven't been found. There were people in adjacent rooms to the drill floor where steel doors were actually blown off due to the initial explosions, and they survived. However, they have not been able to find any trace of the 11 men that were actually on the drill floor itself.
Had Shane himself been afraid? Did Natalie see this as a dangerous job for her husband?
I think everyone sees working offshore as a dangerous job. I mean, every year there are a number of injuries and deaths from offshore workers. It's gotten better out there from it when I first started practicing law some 26 years ago. However, you still see a number of injuries either from helicopter crashes or from actual work on the rigs. Everyone who goes out there has a little bit of anticipation that, they're working in a very dangerous environment, particularly the environment that Shane was working in, because he is doing exploratory drilling. He's not on a production platform that's sitting out there producing oil out of an already drilled well. I mean, he is on the forefront of actually going out and punching holes at 5,000 feet. Which requires a tremendous amount of technology, a tremendous amount of manpower, and there are a lot of dangers in those operations.
Scott Bickford, you're suing BP, Transocean, and Halliburton on behalf of Shane Rostow. Explain each corporation and what you feel is their responsibility.
Well, as your prior guest stated, the Transocean owns the rig. It was then leased by BP to do drilling. Halliburton is the contractor that actually cements the well. And when a well is drilled, very simply, a drill pipe is put down into the ground, and someone like Halliburton comes in and fills that pipe with cement, pushing the cement down through the pipe so it comes out of the bottom of the pipe and then gurgles up around the outside. When it gurgles up around the outside, the actual hole is cemented or cased so that the hole won't collapse. If, in fact, the cementing job is done improperly for any reason, there's the possibility that the hole collapses. There's a possibility that gases in cavities that they're drilling through come into the pipe and come up through the pipe and the collapse. There are some reports that part of the drilling column that they actually drilled had collapsed, and they actually had to drill a parallel column next to it. And that may have occurred because of poor cementing operations. So Halliburton's primary job in this thing was to cement and enforce the well so it wouldn't collapse. Now, this well was drilled both as a exploratory well, and then this rig did something that it doesn't normally do. It added what's called a production liner to the well. In other words, it prepped this particular hole to actually produce. and this rig was set to move off the hull in 2 days.